And now Dave deBronkart is the author of the highly rated Let Patients Help, a patient engagement handbook, and one of the world's leading advocates for patient engagement. After beating stage 4 kidney cancer in 2007, he became a blogger, health policy advisor, and international keynote speaker. An accomplished speaker in his professional life before cancer, he is today the best-known spokesman for the patient engagement movement, attending nearly 300 conferences and policy meetings internationally, including testifying in Washington for patient access to the medical record under meaningful use. A co-founder and current chair of the Society of Participatory Medicine, ePatient Dave has appeared in numerous national magazines. His writings have been published in the British Medical Journal of the Society for General International Medicine Forum, and other international publications as well. Dave's TED Talk, Let Patients Help, went viral, and for years was in the top half of the most viewed TED Talks of all time, with over 500,000 views. Volunteers have added subtitles in 26 languages, indicating the global appeal of this message. In 2012, the National Library of Medicine announced that it is capturing his blog in its History of Medicine division. It's been a pleasure for me to get to know Dave over the last day and a half at this conference, and I'm sure that you will find his talk engaging and very compelling. Please join me in welcoming Dave deBronkart.
Those of you who are behind pillars, I hope you will behave in an empowered and engaged way and move so you can get what you paid for in attending this conference. I do intend to be connecting with all of you. Time for a little preaching. Brothers and sisters, keepers of the bites, hallelujah, our day has come. It is the time when the stuff that we shove around in the cables and on the disk drives and everything and in the cloud is starting to come to light after your 9 years of work here, putting things together. You are ahead of most of the country, most of the world for that matter. And the time is coming now where it's all going to come out and start to make a difference clinically. Okay? Before I start, I should say, by the way, before I got sick, I worked in high-tech marketing, and when I started blogging after my illness, I just picked a nickname. I chose ePatient Dave. It was sort of like Pirate Bob. And when Twitter came along, that became my Twitter handle. See, I know about having a consistent brand, right? Something that's easy to find on the internet. Facebook, I'm ePatient Dave. LinkedIn, I'm ePatient Dave. My website is ePatientDave.com. Right? And if you need to ask what my Skype address is, you need to go talk to your marketing people, okay? So beating cancer is difficult. Having a consistent brand is not. Disclosures, I do some work in advisory consulting on patient perspective for a couple of companies. And as you just heard, so at the 3 o'clock session, in room Emerald 2, we're going to be going through some true stories. The question for that session is, what does it look like when patient engagement is on the hoof? How do you know when you're interacting with an engaged patient or being one, right, or a disengaged one? So on the epatients.net blog, to prepare for this event, I posted a request. Okay, y'all out there, give us some stories of where you yourself, being involved with your medical record, made something work out well, or not being involved caused a problem. Let's see, what does it look like in concrete, specific reality? So we'll be going through those stories in the breakout session and also asking you, what are your stories? See, one of my core principles is that patient is not a third-person word. All right, the first health policy meeting I ever attended outside Boston, what was it? It's the spring of 2008, I think. I noticed that everybody in the room was talking about patients as if it was people out there on the street or at the mall or whatever. But I'll tell you, if you've had an adventure like mine that I'm going to be sharing with you in your family, you know that when it's you yourself or your mother or your kid who's in the hospital bed and you're wondering if they're going to die, all right, it makes a difference. Do not listen to anyone who says we don't need to bring patients to this meeting because we'll all be patients someday. You get different answers when somebody has actually been facing death. Two senior physicians at my hospital, led by this man, Warner Slack, my hospital is Beth Israel Deaconess in Boston, have been saying since the 1970s, and Slack put it in this book, Cyber Medicine, last decade, it can be argued that the largest yet most neglected healthcare resource worldwide is the patient. Now, you heard this morning all the challenges about costs rising and so on. We cannot perform as a community to the best of our potential if we leave available resources unused. And I will be addressing the question, given the fact that I myself, and I'm sure most of you, have no medical training, what is he talking about there when he says the patient can be a valuable resource? A quick review of my own background, because it was completely improbable that I would end up talking here today. I never set out to give speeches about medicine, much less around the world, but it was like an Alice in Wonderland experience. I worked in high-tech marketing, specifically graphic arts, particularly typesetting. Now, if you want to talk about an industry that went through change, all right, the typesetting industry does not exist too much anymore. I understand disruptive innovation from the perspective of the person who got invaded and disrupted. Well, you know, it's funny because if you read the classic literature on disruption, Clay Christensen's work, he talks about how it is not possible for the dominant incumbents in an industry to see it happening because their entire world, their business model and everything is built around a different flow of value than the one that's becoming possible. The mechanism is that the core assets in an industry break loose. In our industry, it was fonts. It used to be if you wanted to use fonts, you had to have a typesetting machine. Well, now we all have fonts in our computers. Most of us have fonts in our phones, and that industry doesn't exist anymore. I am a data geek. I confess it. I do unnatural acts with Excel. If the data won't behave, I get it out of where it is. I paste it into Excel. I fix it. I put it back. I do what's necessary. Data quality is a big deal. Automation in the printing industry, an obscure claim to fame that I have is that I am the author of the world's fastest software to typeset business cards. How's that for a niche market, huh? Well, you know, thanks. Nobody's ever applauded that. But you know, in the 1990s, in the era of mergers and acquisitions, you know, one bank would buy another one, and all of a sudden 10,000 people need new business cards, letterheads, envelopes, and so on, because that was pretty much before email and so on. That was a good business to be in. But one thing you learned quickly was that if the data is not clean, you get high-speed garbage coming out of the printing press. All right, so data quality at the source is essential. I heard in the session last night that Vermont seems to get this, which is great. That just illustrates that you're years ahead of most people. The data's got to be clean before you start flinging it around. In 2007, thank you so much. Oh, could somebody go talk to the gardeners? Thanks. 2007, I discovered I was almost dead and got better in less than a year. True story. I'll share a miniature version of that. In 2008, I started blogging about the ePatient movement. It's funny, you know, the things you can't control. We made sure that the staff here was not going to be moving dishes during the speech. And anyway, in 2009, we formed the Society for Participatory Medicine. I'll say a little more about that. And I started getting asked to give speeches. I mean, I wrote a blog post about my medical record, which it turns out contained a large quantity of junk. Much to my amazement, 3 days later, the Boston Globe called and said, "We think this is important. We want to write about it." And I was like, what? And it turns out the basic problem was that my hospital was the first one to offer a button to move your data to Google Health. Well, they didn't have any structured data. It was all just free text in the chart. So what they decided to do was send what they did have, which was structured, which was my claims history, which had all kinds of, those of you who know how clean claims data is will be, well, anyway, it turns out there was a big policy argument going on in Washington where people wanted to upload claims history as the way to populate our medical records. They wrote about it. They didn't just write about it. They put it on page 1 on April 13th, 2009, and my life went bing, out of control. that was a week before the Health 2.0 conference in Boston. I'm not making this up. People have said if this were a Disney movie, everyone would say it only happens in Disney movies. So you can see the newspaper headlines spinning out of the screen. And then a conference, and at the conference, people were coming up to me and saying, "Oh, you're that guy." I was like, what? And somebody later on, the guy running the conference, came out on stage and said, "Is ePatient Dave here?" Matthew Holt, he's a British rugby player, sort of businessman, always glad to give somebody a bloody nose. I happened to be in the hotel ballroom balcony, so I stood up and said, "I'm up here." Ted Etan of Kaiser said on his blog, "This is the first time medicine ever looked up to a patient." And a woman in the audience, you can look it up, took out her iPhone, took a picture and said, "Pope Dave preaches from the balcony." And one person in the audience there was a woman who was there just covering the event for a Washington think tank. Her name happened to be Lygia Ricciardi, who until recently was the consumer person at ONC, and she went back and told her client, "We ought to bring this guy Dave here." And I ended up sitting at my first policy meeting a week later, or a month later, next to a guy named Josh Seidman, who turned out to be responsible for meaningful use at ONC later. And the first thing I ever heard him say was, "My dog has a better PHR than I do." Right? I would like to introduce my wife over here, who is the one that Dr. DeSalvo mentioned earlier today, the veterinarian who told her this morning, pets have PHRs. Anyway, that's one thing led to another, and in 2010 I started doing this full-time, and in 2011 it became international. I learned to give speeches when I worked in marketing, but I never had a topic, right, that had life and death attached to it. This good-looking doctor here, Tom Ferguson, died in 2006. I never met him. He was a friend of my physician, who is the guy right in the middle over his elbow on the left as you look here. And he was a post-Woodstock sort of hippie doctor who believed in patient power and a real visionary. Some of you who are in my age bracket will remember there was a publication called The Whole Earth Catalog, which is a hippie self-sufficiency book, how to grow your own food, build your own house, not be dependent on the man. Tom Ferguson in the 1980s was the medical editor of The Whole Earth Catalog. He published a magazine and then a book called Medical Self-Care. He knew that the vast majority of what we all do is take care of ourselves and our families at home. But he also knew that when trouble hits, a major limiting factor is how much information we have access to. And that's what we're here to talk about today, all these years later, how much information they had access to. When the internet came along, he saw that radically changed that key parameter in the formula, because it gave us access to two things that we had never had access to before. One was a lot of information that used to only live in the institution, and the other was access to other patients who've been through the disease, who have perspectives, who we can compare notes with. All right, it did not make us oncologists. Some people think that patient empowerment is all about who needs doctors. Are you kidding? When I was diagnosed, I didn't even know I was sick. We'll be hearing about that. Anyway, and he predicted things, and then he started spotting people in the wild doing these. On the far left is a guy named Gilles Friedman, who founded the network of cancer patient communities that I joined. Next to him is Alan Green and his wife Cheryl. Their website, drgreen.com, was the first physician website recognized by the AMA. There's my doctor in the middle, and he coined this term, ePatients. Equipped, engaged, empowered, enabled, some people say educated, about evidence, whatever. The whole idea, well, in 2009, that gang decided to form a Society for Participatory Medicine. Now, I have to tell you here, I am not an academic, all right? Academics like polysyllabic things. Society for Participatory Medicine, 14 syllables. My slogan is, let patients help. You can chant it, right? Let patients help. Notice how Dr. Sands, this is, Dr. Danny Sands is my physician. What these guys did was they said this society cannot be run by a doctor. It has to be run by a doctor and patient. Much to my amazement, they elected my doctor and me as co-chairman of the society. So I went from almost dead in 2007 to co-chairman of a medical society in 2009. People have said this is the jiu-jitsu approach to cancer. You use the energy of the attacker to propel yourself forward. Anyway, you can't make this stuff up. Notice how he has the screen turned, okay? We all hear patients saying, my doctor, my nurse is looking at the computer, not at me, and we hear clinicians saying, I have to pay attention to the computer. I can't pay attention to the patient anymore. He has always felt he co-created this system, which now is crummy and old and needs to be reproduced. In the 1990s at Beth Israel, he has always felt that the medical record is a shared work plan between the doctor and the patient, okay? So sometimes I spot him doing typos. Remember, data quality is important. Well, you know, in typesetting, we learned you can't proofread your own work. You know, you just can't. Somebody else has to look at it. And we'll be getting back to the data quality issue. Some practices have put a flat screen monitor on the wall of the exam room, so even when you're lying on the table, you can see what they're typing, okay? And as we start to bring the medical record home online, more about that coming up, right? We will do the information about the patient's medical status and history will become part of the fabric of life rather than something that only has value when you go to the doctor. All right, that's the world, and it's you guys who are working to make that happen. And I know it's hard. You know, when typesetting switched from names like CompuGraphic and Linotype and Addressograph and so on to PostScript and desktop publishing, interoperability was hard. And all we were doing was putting fonts and colors on a page. All right, we didn't have 11,000 condition codes and all of those things. So anyway, Health Leaders Magazine, which goes to thousands of hospital and healthcare executives, got wind of this new society, and they came and interviewed a bunch of us. And to our amazement, they made it a cover story. They called it The Patient of the Future. Now, this is important to me. Remember, as a marketing person, I've spent my career trying to get attention, trying to earn attention. If we had gotten some $50,000 grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation or Commonwealth Fund or something to generate publicity, and we'd hired a big fancy PR firm, we would have said, dude, you got us a cover story. But we didn't. This was the editors of Health Leaders, all right? And they got it right in the story editorially, that in the circle there it says a new relationship. It isn't about what patients are doing differently. It isn't about what doctors are doing differently. It's about a new relationship. They sent a photographer to my home to take a picture of me, and I just figured it'd be the usual headshot that gets cut into a column of type. Quite honestly, I would have worn a different shirt if I'd known they were going to do this. It says, full page on the top of the table of contents, in a cheesy Hawaiian-style shirt. But consider what they were saying. This is full page on the table of contents. What they were saying is that the patient of the future is a middle-aged schlump in a bad shirt looking stuff up on the internet. All right? Now, every December, they run a feature, 20 people who make healthcare better. And this particular year, number one on the list was Atul Gawande, the famous surgeon, and he is phenomenal. The essays he writes in the New Yorker about McAllen, Texas, and why things work better in some places than others, he is a great thinker. Number two was Dean Kamen. In 1976, he invented the first wearable insulin pump. That's got a bit of impact on healthcare, huh? And his current company is making amazing robotic limbs for amputees, like a smart knee that can tell when the ground is shaky. Imagine my surprise when number 3 on the list was me in that stupid shirt. It was like, guys, couldn't you have sent, I would have sent you a different picture. But importantly, number 4 was Dr. Sands, right? My doctor and me. And what the editors of Health Leaders were saying is that this rebalanced relationship, right, belongs on the same page with Atul Gawande and Dean Kamen. Now, it was at this time that I was thinking, what the heck is going on here? I'd had plenty of ideas in my career about, oh, I know I can make a business out of X, Y, or Z, and it ain't that easy, you know? So I felt this calling. Consider this, one day that summer, August of 2009, I said to a friend, you know, I really want to do this, but I just got out of cancer. I don't dare jump off the cliff with no health insurance and so on. I said, you know, what I'd really like would be if I could find a part-time job with full benefits. The next day, the company president called me in and said they were cutting my job in half with full benefits because I was spending too much time in Washington. It's like, whoa, what beast emerged from this near-death experience? So I went looking for evidence. Am I really an indicator of the future? Well, so I looked for cold, hard evidence. Who's getting online? Well, I've been online since 1989 on CompuServe. I was a SysOp, a forum leader on 4 forums there. In 2009, the Pew Internet and American Life Project said 76% of US adults were online, and 83% of those regularly look for health information. So by that one measure, what this little monopoly piece was doing isn't a leading indicator of the future. But you're crazy if you just take one thing like that and jump off the cliff. So I looked for more evidence, and I said, well, who's romancing online? Haha, well, I found my wife on the internet in 1999. All right, Match.com. I got her 1 week before her subscription expired. Remember, she's the veterinarian. Well, so, and it's funny because I was working in the print industry then, and a year after we met, I had to go to Paris and give a speech about XML data. Oh darn, so we got hitched and had a honeymoon in Paris. There she is on top of the Musée d'Orsay, the Impressionist Museum. 10 years later, 1 in 8 weddings in the US was people who met online. And in fact, 2 years after that, 1 in 5 couples are people who met online. All right? What's possible for people to find what they're looking for is different today than it was 20, 30 years ago. Something real has changed. Now, often you'll hear doctors say, stay off the internet, there's garbage. Well, before I met Jenny, I went through some suboptimal search results. But importantly, think about this. These concerns are valid, but when you think about it, everybody, when they're new at something, has no clue and they make mistakes. In my testimony for Meaningful Use 1 in Washington, I said, guess what? Until people get experienced, they're inexperienced. It is a mistake to judge people's potential by what they do when they're new. You'll probably remember yourself, your grandmother, whoever, when people are new to email, some point, some number of months down the road, they say, oh, I can't believe it, I'm related to a Nigerian prince, I'm gonna get $1 million. It happens, right? But then people get savvy as they gain experience. As I said in my testimony, for some reason this verse came to me. The solution is not to restrict and constrain. Empower the people, enable and train. Right? If people are not good at helping, teach them to be better. Well, here's a short version of my cancer story. I was an engaged patient years before I ever heard the term. I had moved away for a few years, and I came back to see Dr. Sands for my first annual checkup. And in preparation for the event, I sent him an email with 12 things I wanted to go over. Now, some people say, oh, you sent your doctor an email? Well, yes. I mean, with any other high-value advisor you have in life, do you wait until you get to the visit to say why you wanted to connect? And he said he was glad because he had a few things he wanted to catch up on, and this let us plan the time together. So here's an example of how this worked out, okay, with what I now see was being an engaged patient. A month before the event, before the appointment, I started having a weird optical symptom in my right eye. I was working in the kitchen one day, and this little dazzling spot started, and I thought I had some junk in my eye, so I tried to wipe it out, but there was nothing there. And it started growing, and it got bigger, and it turns out it was boomerang shaped. Now, those of you who are MDs are probably starting to tick, 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 diagnose what's happening, right? The boomerang got bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually disappeared out of the eye. And the first time this happened, I thought, whoa, flashback, because I am a child of the 60s. And, not that there are any of those in Vermont, but the second time it happened, exactly the same, I knew enough to say, what was that? And I started taking notes. And the third time it happened, right? I recorded that as well. Now, I could have waited until I got to the doctor's office, right, which is what a disengaged patient would do, and then bring it up. But I went out Googling, and I Googled my butt off. It took over 2 hours of false leads before I found something that exactly matched what I had, all right? And I pasted it into the email, right, with the URL so that he could see it and he could click it, same as you would with any colleague. What do you think about this, right? People say that patients shouldn't diagnose themselves. Well, who am I to diagnose myself? But this was a web page about ophthalmic migraine, so I pasted it in with a question mark. See, I wasn't being the doctor. I wasn't saying I don't need a doctor. I was doing everything in my power to partner with my chosen expert. And as it happens, we got this resolved before we even got to the visit. So that's patient engagement on the hoof. When somebody is thinking about what this is like Empowerment 101 from the 1960s, you know. Know what you want, do consciousness raising, be aware of what's going on around you. If things are happening that you don't want, speak up, right? And so that's what we're talking about here. As it happens, another thing on the list was my shoulder. I had a stiff shoulder, no real problem. It was just, instead of reaching up like this, I was just crusty and lazy. And so I'd rather do this. So I said, please get me an appointment. And when you see me, I knew I wouldn't be able to do it the same day. Some people are doing same-day referrals, but not most people. So I said, you know, if I don't need the appointment, then we can just cancel it and free up the time slot. This was the moment in time where the story is frozen in vivid multisensory recall. If you've had a moment in your family where you've gotten news like this, you'll know what I mean. We had the physical on December 30th, 2006. I saw one of the Red Sox team physicians on Monday, January 2nd, after the New Year's weekend. 9 a.m., January 3rd, 2007, I was at work, 9 a.m. exactly, and the phone rang. I remember what the desk surface looked like. I remember what the cubicle partitions looked like, the bright blue partition carpets. I remember what the Sony desk phone looked like with the digits 900 on it when the phone rang. I don't know what the mechanism is by which the brain does this at a time like this. Dr. Sands said, Dave, the radiologist called me, and your shoulder's going to be fine. He said, I called up the image on my screen at home, and I thought, well, can I call up the image on my screen? Those days are coming. Just think about this moment. So I couldn't see this. He said, your shoulder's going to be fine. It's just a rotator cuff problem, but there's something in your lung. And when you hear there's something in your lung, I mean, think about hearing that right now. You start thinking, what? Am I supposed to be feeling something? What have I not been noticing? All right? To make a long story short, there's a lot more about this on the website. I went in for a CT scan. We discovered that there were 5 metastases scattered through both lungs. And I went in for my first ultrasound. I mean, Ginny knows I'm not a dog, but she's seen lots of ultrasounds. She came along, and we saw that it was in the kidney. And this is a diagram of stage 4 kidney cancer from the website of the drug I eventually got, high-dose interleukin. Totally by coincidence, there's that thing in my shoulder. I'm a poster boy. The first pain I had was in the opposite leg 6 weeks later. I now have a steel leg. On my left side, a steel femur. Some people think patient engagement is anti-medicine. Well, ladies and gents, I can stand on that leg. That was a disaster 6 years ago. It shows one in the brain. Mine was in the skull. I had one in the left arm as well. So when I was trying to avoid the leg breaking, I had a walker, but I couldn't put my weight on that arm. And then if you look at the head again, just before my treatment started, I had a metastasis erupt from my tongue in my mouth. I had a kidney cancer tumor growing out of my tongue muscle. I was sick, silent killer, and the best available evidence said that my median survival after diagnosis was 24 weeks. This will sober the mind. It will focus the attention. I woke up at 1 a.m. I remember looking at the ceiling thinking, what am I doing sleeping? My life is ending. This was in January 2007. When I get stressed, I do arithmetic. Big surprise, right? Well, I figured June 25th was the date. And as time went by, we joked about it. That's my drop-dead date. My game is to beat the drop-dead date. My dad's funeral had been a year and a half earlier. I thought, what's Mom's face going to look like when she buries me? And that's a hard thing to think about. And the hardest thing was to sit down with my daughter, who was just out of college, and her boyfriend, and say, this doesn't look good. Here's what we're going to do. And at the end of that meeting, I said, but we're going to be sober and thoughtful, and we're going to proceed. Just don't panic. And I actually said, don't go get married prematurely just so you can do it while Dad's still alive. Then you're left with this question, what are my options? What can I do? Okay? I chose, some people say, I'm scared, just take care of me. That's fine with me. I never say anybody should be like me. Okay? But my doctor, I decided to get engaged and do everything I could. It was like game on. An amazing thing happened then. As soon as the biopsy confirmed that it was kidney cancer, my doctor prescribed a patient community. Remember Gilles Friedman, the guy on another friend of Tom Ferguson's? His online network includes a really good kidney cancer community that my doctor knew about. They have now moved. They've made a company out of it, smartpatients.com. Having been online on CompuServe long ago, I knew how to join a community. Within the first 2 hours after my posting my first note, people said things that no doctor ever says, like, welcome to the community, nobody wants to be here, and we immediately started discussing how likely am I to die. You can't find a website that will face that question head on, but one of my slogans is patients know what patients want to know. Within the first 2 hours, people said, this is an uncommon disease, get to a hospital, it does a lot of cases. There's no cure, but high-dose interleukin sometimes works. It usually doesn't, but when it does, about half the time, it's complete and permanent. Voila, 7.5 years later, right? The side effects are severe. They can kill you. That's why you got to get to a specialist hospital. Don't let them give you anything else first, because it reduces the chances that interleukin will work. And here are 4 doctors in your area who do it. And one of them was at my hospital, and their phone numbers, by the way. Ladies and gentlemen, when you think you're dying, this is useful information, and consider this, all right? I'm not anti-science. I'm an MIT graduate. This information does not exist in the literature. This is a new kind of value oriented around what patients find important that does not replace the literature, it adds to it. Something new has happened, okay? Another thing I did, my doctor, I had to log in to look at some of my information. This was not complete access to the chart, but I could read radiology reports. Some people say patients can't understand this stuff. Well, I have friends and family who know more than I do about these things. I gave them my password. Some people say, oh, you gave them your password? Well, yeah, I was dying, That's, seriously, I could go on. Long story short, for me, surgery and interleukin worked. Here is that same one of those tumors. It was the size of a golf ball 50 weeks later. Interleukin does not require that they cut you open to get at every metastasis. They certainly cut me open to get that kidney out, but all the remaining tumors shrank. The proof of the pudding is that at the beginning of the case, one of the things they told me was, all right, you got to stop this slow weight loss. The only symptoms I'd had was I was getting tired in the evening, but I was 56, what the heck? And I'd been slowly losing weight, but to me that was a victory. That's what the doctor had been telling me to do, right? But then they said, no, it turns out this is bad. This is the cancer-consuming stuff, and you don't want to get down to the point where it starts eating muscle tissue, called cachexia. So they sent me a diet, how to increase your caloric input. And I remember, Ginny can testify, it said things like put real whipped cream on all desserts, get rid of everything low fat, have pizza for snacks. And I remember sitting in the recliner saying, honey, would you get me another root beer float for my health? And unfortunately, a year after this, the treatment had worked, and Dr. Sands sent me a note through our portal saying, you have not expired, but your order to eat more has. And I was back to where I had the weight control was my #1 objective. And I sent him a note that said, now about this shoulder, because all of a sudden the stiff shoulder became the top priority. Consider this. A year ago, the British Medical Journal invited me to submit an essay that they titled, How the ePatient Community Saved My Life. Think about this. This is the top of establishment medicine requesting an essay on this. See, one of the factors here, consider this. You're dying, your mother's dying, your kid's dying of some disease. The side effects of the only treatment that offers hope might kill you. I was like, okay, game on. Where's my prep kit? How do I get ready? I went to the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Society, Kidney Cancer Association, no advice on how to prepare for or survive the side effects of high-dose interleukin. So I turned to my patient peers. Patients know what patients want to know, and I got 16 firsthand stories of how people had gotten through. These are people who had survived the treatment. Some it had worked for, some it had not. And when every side effect hit, I knew what was happening, and I knew what to do about it. Now, it was severe for me. My treatment was eventually discontinued. One of my side effects was capillary leak syndrome. Interleukin is a powerful immune system substance. It caused the walls of all my capillaries to open up. Fluid ran out. My legs were like water balloons. My blood pressure dropped to 50/30, and they discontinued the treatment. I'd had only about 60% of the recommended doses, but it was enough. And as the following months went by after the treatment had been stopped, the tumors continued to shrink. And Dr. McDermott, my oncologist, agreed to be quoted in the BMJ saying, "You were really sick. I don't know if you could have tolerated enough medicine if you hadn't been so well prepared." Consider that. Ladies and gentlemen, I assert that's value, all right? And what we need to do if patients are getting stupid advice on the internet and so on is improve, figure out how to nurture and make those communities more robust. Now, I spent longer on the introduction than I planned to because we were having so much fun. So I'm going to run through quickly because I want to get to some more of the IT-related things here. And again, the breakout session at 3 o'clock. Folks, I know this work you're doing is hard. It is worth it. It is worth it. People perform better when they're informed better. It's perverse to keep people in the dark and call them ignorant. Like, patients won't understand this stuff. Well, question, how can it be that the most useful and relevant information about a disease could possibly exist outside of traditional channels, okay? Well, this is a generic network diagram, which I've been using for years, but earlier this year I realized that there's a really good medical metaphor here. The dotted lines about this generic network diagram are analogous to capillaries, and information that can change outcomes is like a nutrient that can enable a better response when it shows up at a place. In the past, all information was distributed through centralized control from the medical establishment, which I love, they saved my life. Now we are not solely dependent on that. Dr. Ferguson, Tom Ferguson, at his death was working on a manifesto funded by Robert Wood Johnson that was published. You can see the black cover of it there. Ginny says, why is it called a white paper? It's got a black cover. Well, it's called the ePatient white paper. One of the things he said in there, he interviewed Donald Lindbergh, the director of the National Library of Medicine, who said that, so this guy knows something about the medical literature. He said, when I was in medical school, I was told that a good doctor would go home and read 2 articles every night to keep up on things. He said, if I did that today, after 1 year, I'd be 400 years behind. There's too much new literature for anybody to know everything. That was 10 years ago. The number now is 1,100 years behind after 1 year. It's easy math. 2,200 papers a year published last year. If you read 2, you'll fall behind at 1,100 to 1. The point here is it's not humanly possible to keep up. And the point, the most difficult audience intellectually I ever spoke to was in Jerusalem 3 years ago. Now, my best friend was an Israeli intellectual, Israeli physicist. He taught me a lot about that culture. They care a lot about who thinks better and so on. Well, imagine speaking to a meeting of the Israel Internet Society, a gathering of Israeli doctors and lawyers arguing the ethics of using the internet when the information is not carefully controlled. All right? And guess who was the last thing between them and dinner? And I said, Any clinician whose sense of self-worth depends on knowing everything is in big trouble these days. It's no insult if a less trained person has seen something that you haven't. All right, but we still need the clinician's training and experience to put it into context. So this is the beginning of disruption, remember? Where an asset starts to come loose and become available to other people. It doesn't devalue those skills. Well, then there's the lethal lag time, 2 to 5 years from the time a study is completed until it's available, until it's gone through peer review and publication and landed on your doctor's desk. All right? Now, if you, through a patient community, discover a paper that, because it turns out most researchers are happy to have activated patients say, oh, this is great stuff, I want to tell my friends, well, they welcome it. And patients who, I know people who prolonged their lives by finding researchers who were working on things that were years from publication. All right? They brought it to their doctor, and this is not going rogue, all right? You bring it to your expert and say, here, I found this, what do you think? And if all other options are exhausted, people will try things, at least doctors who welcome the assistance. Well, and then finally, death by Googling. Stay off the internet, you'll kill yourself. Well, turns out Dr. Gunther Eisenbach, who was then in Germany and now he's in Toronto, looked for 3 years, a decade ago, to find a single case of somebody who died from stupid advice they got on the internet. 0. Null auf Deutsch. And, well, it's interesting. He found people who'd done stupid things. I had one woman come up to me at a non-medical conference and say, oh, you had cancer, chemo is a fraud. All you need is ionized water. Hey, get off me. People had done stupid things. People had hurt themselves, but not a single one who had died. All right? So the harm is not as bad as people thought. And now you compare that with all the writings about medical errors. We have no data yet on how much harm, how much accidental death is caused by errors in the medical record or information that could have saved a life not being there. And Ferguson said it may be more dangerous not to educate yourself about your condition. These conclusions are no more anti-doctor than Copernicus was anti-astronomer when he said maybe the Earth's not the center of the solar system. All right? And so you heard that I had a TED Talk. This TED Talk was a remarkable thing. For those of you who don't know, TED Talks are short, like 15-minute talks that where you're supposed to blow the audience's mind in a few minutes. It's challenging, but I will brag that I not only got a standing ovation, but I got them chanting, "Let patients help," by the end of the talk. And this conference was organized 4.5 years ago in the spring of 2010 to be produced in 2011 at this university in Holland on the German border. And they announced that it was a TED conference made up of mostly of patient speakers. And they have this conceptual diagram here that I love, because it turns out it has more power than they thought. This was first published in 2010. In the old days, all knowledge, all assets, all wisdom lived in the medical institution at the top. The dotted line there is sort of the membrane between the institution and us, the humble supplicants, okay? And down below were individuals, and all assets were necessarily transferred through that one-way error. Now, in the world of Health 2.0 today, sometimes patients are bringing value to the transaction. All right? Their ability to do this is entirely moderated by how much information they have their hands on, okay? They are not the same, but they are closer together. And the world that they were talking about and proposing is Health 3.0 and 4.0, a world in the future where we're all swimming in a common pond of information so we can have our own individual views of the same data. This is exactly like Web 2.0, when the web began to harness the intelligence of its users, as Tim O'Reilly put it, except now this is health harnessing the intelligence of its users. And what we now understand is that it's not just that the patient got smarter, it's that they have this network. If you know anything about cancer, one of its mechanisms is angiogenesis. It grows new blood vessels, new capillaries to draw nutrients to itself. This is a person with a need, essentially, developing capillaries. Something real is happening here. And the world we're moving into Everybody has their own network. And there's one more IT concept before I skip to the end that I want to just encourage you to pursue. Information liquidity. Liquidity. If I have a cup of coffee beans and I tip it over, it doesn't run all over the table. It's not liquid. If I have a cup of coffee and I tip it over, it's liquid and it spills all over creation. Information liquidity transforms what is possible. All right, and this is as you work to move data around, this is what you're producing. This is a year ago at the Stanford Medicine X conference, I came up with this way of expressing it. Not liquid, a train on train tracks carrying a load of coal, okay? Moving it takes effort, right? It's slow and predictable. If something shows up, you know it's coming. And arrival on unexplained tracks, so to speak, is suspicious. If a carload of coal shows up unexpected, it's like, what is this and where did it come from? The analogy to medical literature, to medical knowledge is relevant. Not liquid is a stream running through the forest in the snowmelt. Okay, excuse me, that's liquid. It is frictionless. In fact, controlling it takes effort. That's how social media is, right? Something gets loose on social media. Right? By the way, my favorite social media boo-boo was of the past couple of years was last night. I discovered that in Hudson, New York, I think it's the Union Street Guest House decided they were tired of wedding parties posting bad reviews. So they weaseled something into their contract. When you sign up to have your wedding at their place, there's a clause that says, if any of your guests post a negative review, we're going to deduct $500 from your deposit. Basically find the family. Well, as soon as that got noticed and got out on social media, boom, 500 zero-star reviews for the place in the next few hours, and that went viral. And controlling the flow takes effort, ladies and gentlemen, right? Fast and unpredictable, and the pathways are everywhere. And we now see that maps exactly onto this. So I want to say, you know about APIs? Put APIs on your database and interface so that other people can come and grab the data. Well, Todd Park, who was the CTO at Health and Human Services, he's now working directly for Obama, has this saying, data liberation. And within a few months of his taking over at HHS, he had put APIs on all the warehouses of vast amounts of data that taxpayers had paid for years, so that private companies could come and suck up that data and make products out of it. And you can read about some of the things they did to, like a marvelous tool for detecting asthma outbreaks and all kinds of things. Once again, people perform better when they're informed better. The corollary, as I said, it's perverse to keep people in the dark and then call them ignorant, right? Now, there is an objection. My patients aren't asking for this. They don't want to know about this. Well, you know, with any culture change, I'll pick another one. 100 years ago, this is from Election Day a couple of years ago on Facebook, there was this flyer from 100 years earlier, vote no on women's suffrage. And the number one bullet on this thing was, why would you do that? Well, because 90% of women aren't asking for it. You know, good thinking. The next one, by the way, was, I'll move ahead. Another thing, there's this wonderful series of 45 vintage sexist ads that wouldn't go down so well today. Another one there, and this is from the 1960s. Sooner or later, your wife will drive home one of the best reasons for owning a Volkswagen. Notice the crumpled fender? And the fine print, get ready for this, says, women are soft and gentle, but they hit things. And you can look up the other ads on that thing. Well, you know, it's funny. I did this I did this talk in Switzerland a year and a half ago, and some women in the audience bristled because on the subject of women's suffrage, apparently the last part of Switzerland gave women full voting rights in 2001. So the culture change happens at different speeds. Well, and in my testimony in Washington, I said the punchline on this, I didn't know about this ad, but I used the same analogy of women drivers always hitting things. The punchline is now that women have experience, insurance statistics show that they have 1/3 fewer accidents than the men who used to make fun of them. All right? That's that thing about it's a mistake to judge someone's potential. Now, what if the information they send you is wrong? I'm going to be quick because I want to wrap up. Well, you know, I was very moved last night watching the rehearsals for that vignette that you saw this morning. Sally Wagner being discharged to rehab after a hip replacement, that's my mom, figuratively speaking. 3 years ago, she had a hip replacement, and when she was discharged to rehab, they did not have electronic medical records transfer. So they had to print the stuff up and out and type it in again. You know, you type stuff, the typos get into it. And her hyperthyroid came across as hypothyroid. That could have been one of those accidental deaths. But you know what saved the day? There is an important social dynamic that you may want to sniff out in your communities. I call it the alpha daughter in a family. And I have 2 alpha sisters, and when they step into the room, it's like, all right, what's going on, right? And they said, politely, could we check the chart? And happily, the provider, the rehab place, welcomed the family engagement. See, there's family engagement on the hoof. They spotted the typo, and it got fixed before any harm was done. Think about how much harm is created if somebody says, a relative of mine was in the hospital a couple of years ago, and I said, could we look at the chart? And they said, no, you can see it after he's discharged. Not bright. And yet, if you think that that exists to help the doctors, well, then there's Laura Adams, and I'll jump to the end. Laura Adams, Rhode Island Quality Institute, magnificent, intelligent MD. She was in pre-op, waiting to have a mastectomy, and the nurse happened to mention to her, well, at least you won't be lopsided. And she said, what do you mean? And the nurse said, well, you're getting a bilateral. She said, no, I'm not. All right? Nobody knows. There is no audit trail to know how that wrong information got in there. But if we let patients help see the data, and the nurse actually said, well, that's what came to us, as if it couldn't possibly be wrong. And it's everywhere. I spoke a couple years ago at the VA's eHealth University. This was the IT geeks working on their system. We did an audience poll. How many of you looked in your record and know if it has mistakes? And long story short, 75% of the people in the room who had looked at their record had found mistakes in it. All right? This is the easy way to get people engaged when there's not a crisis going on. Say, could you proofread this? Could you check for mistakes? We have no idea how some of this stuff got in there. And they just get involved and they become conversant about it. Wall Street Journal, June 10th. Healthcare providers now want patients to check the chart. This was Geisinger, Mayo, Cleveland Clinic, Kaiser. Right? Get patients to check the chart. Data quality is essential, and I'm just going to skip through to the end. If you're not familiar with the Open Notes study that was published a couple of years ago, go look it up. Open Notes with one word. For 3 years, they ran a 3-year project, and in the middle year, they let patients go in through the portal and see every word of their primary's visit notes. The question was, will the world go to hell in a handbasket with, why'd you call me an SOB? No, sir, that means shortness of breath. Things. Well, you know, it's a real concern. And there was the famous Seinfeld episode where Elaine wanted to look at her chart, and they'd written difficult in there. Well, long story short, at the end of the study, 99% of patients who had had access to their visit notes wanted to continue. 17 to 26% of doctors preferred not to, but when they saw all the other benefits, you can look this up, not a single one did. Have you ever seen a study where 99% of patients and 100% of doctors wanted to continue? Are there any questions? All right? Drill a hole through, let the patient and family at home see the visit notes, and this is what happens. And in this world of changing business of medicine, 85% of patients said availability of open notes would influence their choice of providers going forward. So if hospital A in a town wants to do it and hospital B says no, game on. We'll see how that unfolds. It's how it all unfolded for me. This is taken the night of that physical in 2006. This is a guy who was dying and didn't know it. At the office Halloween party, I was diagnosed in January and my treatment ended on July 23rd. All better, 6.5 months. Whoa, right? Miracle stuff. At the office Halloween party, somebody snapped this picture, me grinning at the ghoul. I had pictured my mother's face at my funeral. And instead, in May of 2009, here we were laughing on the day when I did get to walk my baby girl down the aisle. And I am so happy about the best of medicine. What can I say? The government made a poster out of that. It's on healthit.gov, and when I visited Dr. DeSalvo, she agreed to stand under that poster outside her office, and we did the ePatient salute together. There you go. And last July, I was so glad to be there when my granddaughter Zoe Grace was born. And actually, this was in July, this first birthday. Ladies and gentlemen, you're right. This work is hard, but it is worth it. Get the data to the point where it's needed. All right, remember, in the breakout session, if you want to attend ours, and I'm sure it'll all be captured for later distribution, 3 to 4 p.m. Thank you, brothers and sisters, keepers of the bites. Thank you for your work, and please let patients help.